Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Digital Health and Wearables series. Before I go ahead and introduce another magnificent guest for you, I'd like to remind you to subscribe, share the channel with amazing content, other guests, with your communities in healthcare. And to start with, let's acknowledge our global partner and sponsor, Spirit Digital, and also Ascom, the series sponsor for now, specialists in healthcare, wearables, and digital monitoring. But I'm excited today to also introduce Ian Binks, which is the Business Development Manager for Global Clinical Solutions at Ascom. How are you, Ian?
Great. Thank you very much, João. It's a real pleasure to join you today and discuss this very interesting topic.
Oh, fantastic. Nice to have you. So we go straight to the questions. The first question, Ian, that I have for you is, what is your view on the potential of wearables in hospital environments? And do you have any examples or case studies, anything like that?
Yeah, so I think the introduction of wearables in the hospital environment is really, really interesting. Fundamentally down to one clear point, it's really about visibility of what traditionally has not been visible. So we're talking about the condition of patients and specifically the changing condition of patients who normally wouldn't be continuously monitored. And I think there's a broad consensus in the medical world that if it's practicable and cost effective, every patient in hospital should be continuously monitored. That's the only way that you're going to guarantee that you pick up the signs of deterioration for things like cardiac arrest and stroke, acute kidney injury, sepsis, all of these things which can be very, very rapid deteriorations in a patient. If you don't have a patient on continuous monitoring, it's quite hard to pick those up because you only have sporadic spot checks, maybe once every hour, once every 4 hours, etc. And you have no visibility of what happens in between those checks. And that's where the real damage can occur. So I think the option to monitor those patients who wouldn't have the traditional monitoring, because the reason it's not practicable and cost effective with traditional monitors is, one, they cost a lot of money. Two, they take up a lot of space. You know, if you're wheeling around a patient, we've all seen patient monitors, right? They're quite big in the bedside. If you're wheeling one of those around, they take up space, they need mains power. You know, it's not great for the hospital environment. But more importantly for me, if you put a patient on a traditional monitor, they are tethered to the bed. They can't move because they have to stay in the bed because they've got the wires on them. They've got a big monitor next to them, which is what's looking out for them. And it's really fundamental that patients should be able to move around if they can, if they're physically able to. One of the big problems you get with patients who spend a few days in hospital, especially if they're elderly, is if they can't move around, they suffer from muscular atrophy, they can't get out of bed, and they find it very difficult to get back to a position of looking after themselves outside of hospital. This can delay discharge and things like that. The other point is, if you get to this position using wearables for continuous monitoring, you can actually start to look out after patients outside of the hospital environment. This is a great way to free up that bed capacity and to get patients to a position where they're more comfortable, where they're safer, where they're likely to recover quicker, because you have that visibility. Once you move into this world of wearables, that issue of where is the patient stops being an issue, because you have the visibility irrespective of where they are. So you can put them in the position that is most conducive to their recovery, which could be their home. And you know that you've got live, up-to-date clinical data that's coming to you. And if you couple it with decision support, clinical decision support software that can take the variables and add some intelligence to it, then you know that you'll be alerted if there's an issue with that patient and you can deal with it.
Oh, brilliant, Ian. Fantastic insights. Thank you so much for that. I mean, a couple of things, the displaying of the data, not being also kind of obliged to be at bedside all the time. And as you mentioned, the remote monitoring is the way forward. And I think now everybody's looking not only for early discharges, but also to keep an eye on patients in different settings, at home, at care homes, in different fantastic insights. Thank you so much. So the value of wearables is really like jumping out. Finally, I think, I'm a very big advocate of wearables. The value is is really jumping out now, and they are a fantastic vehicle to drive this forward. So, and you guys are doing great work.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Moving on to the second question. How do you think technology will enable future digital transformation in clinical settings?
That's a great question. So the way I like to look at this is you can draw, if you draw a line from left to right, and all the way at the left-hand side, you have the patient who's at home, who's maybe under the care of a general practitioner, primary care. Maybe they have a cold or they have the flu or something like that. And all the way at the right-hand side, you have the patient who's in critical care on a mechanical ventilator and a cocktail of infusions and various other things, right? The most acute level of care. And what you have is the burden of care for the individual patient all the way up at the right-hand side of critical care is incredibly high. You have, huge amounts of medical devices for that patient. You have very expensive drugs. You have lots of doctors and nurses looking after each individual. The burden of care is enormous. And down at the bottom end, the visibility of the patient is almost non-existent. So you have this balancing act of where should the patient be along this line, dependent on what's wrong with them. Now, the aim in healthcare is to shift patients as quickly as possible from the right-hand side of this line to the left-hand side of this line, to move them down the acuity so that they are costing less to take care of, and that resource is available to take care of other people. But as you're moving them down, the other aim is to stop patients coming back up from the left to the right. We have to stop patients deteriorating. And that's very hard to do. And what you have is that at that right-hand side, you've got immense visibility of every single thing that's going on with the patient. And it can be slow to move those patients down towards the left-hand side, because every step that you take, you lose visibility. You lose some visibility of some condition with the patient. And it becomes harder to understand if they are getting worse again instead of getting better. So the use of wearables, what wearables will allow us to do is be much more proactive in moving patients down that chain. Because we know if I move a patient from critical care to intermediate care, I've probably still got good visibility. I've got monitors and various other things. So I see what's going on. If I move them from intermediate care to a general ward, I'm going to lose that visibility. But if I do that with some wearables, I've still got a really good sight on what's happening. And I can do that step by step by step. I can move them from a general ward to an assisted living facility dependent on the patient, or a nursing facility. I can move them from there to home. And we keep that visibility. So that is fundamental. If I look at some practical examples, we have a hospital in Napoli in Italy who needed to look after COVID patients at the height of the pandemic. And the use of wearables allowed them to take a stance where they were monitoring those patients at home. Their view was the default position was monitor the patients at home with a kit of wearable devices and a specialist dashboard center in the hospital with the right clinicians' visibility for that information. And then in the first few weeks, they monitored, I think, just under 600 patients, and it was 585. And fewer than 60, less than 10% of those patients ended up needing any hospital care at all. It was better for the patients because they were at home, they were more comfortable, they had their own facilities around them, and it was better for the hospital because you're not introducing this infection risk by bringing all of these patients in. Because without wearables, every single one of those patients would have needed some time in hospital to understand how severe their condition was. So I really see it fundamentally as the ability to shift patients left on that scale of acuity and to keep them to the left on that scale of acuity. I don't think we can do that without wearables.
Oh, fantastic, Ian. Well, so much you mentioned there. I mean, the power of wearables. I mean, in the first place, we think is only about acquiring data, but combining with your system, you really have a patient management tool combination. And I'm a co-author of a book, and I wrote a book chapter on my vision on the combination of wearables and artificial intelligence will be the true game changer. And I think that's in layman terms what you describe. I mean, the combination of your system, and it's fantastic that you also trying to enable them to be more self-sufficient as patients, to look after themselves. I mean, it's a big piece in here, self-management, the remote monitoring, the patient management, fantastic work that you're doing there. And the case study with the Napoli hospital, you really have some concrete.
Yeah.
Is I think the pandemic served as well in a way of pushing. We need to do something different, and in a way, the negative connotation of the pandemic really impacted the digital health agenda to do things differently because there is a need for it. I mean, we're forced to really think differently, and you're doing that really well. So thank you for that, Ian.
Thank you.
Well, the very last question is: what do you think needs to be changed in healthcare for digital transformation?
That could be a really long answer to that one, but let's try and boil it down a little bit. So I guess I could get on my favorite soapbox here. One of my favorite things that I talk about a lot is what we're actually doing in healthcare at the moment. And the point is, we wait for people to get sick and we treat them accordingly. And that's, that's the way that the healthcare system works. You can't look after everybody. You've got to just, you spot the signs of deterioration and you apply appropriate treatment. So what we're doing is, instead of looking after healthy people, we're mitigating sickness. So the way I like to say it, and I read this somewhere, unfortunately, I can't credit the original author because I don't know who said it first, but we're not doing healthcare, we're doing sick care. We're not caring for the healthy, we are mitigating the sickness. And the worse it gets, the more effort and resource we have to apply to get the patients back to healthy. And then as soon as they're healthy, that visibility goes. They disappear off into society, and eventually they might get sick again, and then we'll treat them again. And that's how it works. And it's extremely reactive. So we wait for a problem to occur, we react to that problem. If that problem gets worse, we react again, and so on and so forth. And I think with the technology that we have now, with wearables the way they are, the accuracy and the affordability of wearables, combined with serious medical device integration that allows you to get multiple different devices talking in one hub, one source of truth of that data, and apply clinical decision support. And as you talked about, AI in the future, right? To apply some intelligence to the data that comes in. We already have the building blocks to be far more proactive in how we treat. So we know that there's a good deal of effort going into personalized medication because, the standard, this dose of that drug just doesn't fit the general population. It fits an abstract person who is an aggregation of the whole population. And that's not really one individual. So things need to be individualized. But also the fact that, I've got a smartwatch. It measures my heart rate constantly. It measures my exercise, measures my activity. It talks about how many calories I'm burning. I get so much data on my phone that tells me if I'm running correctly, if my gait is okay. All of this stuff just from one wearable device. I have another heart rate monitor that I wear when I exercise, which gives me loads of data. And we have this. So we should be, what needs to change is people's ability to manage their own data and an honest, open discussion in society about how data can be harvested and used for healthcare, for beneficial methods of use within society. Because people are scared, because their data is constantly harvested by people like Facebook and Google and so on to advertise to you, to sell you something. But the data that exists can be used to keep you healthy, to stop you getting sick, to proactively care. And that burden of care that I talked about in the second question, it can really be shifted all the way to the left, because we start to see early on, this patient is showing signs of, an unusual heart rhythm that's occasionally occurring. And I know this because they've got that smartwatch that's monitoring them all the time. And we can intervene. You can get the right person to go and talk to that patient, to call them, to speak to them, to see them in a clinic before they have a cardiac arrest and end up in intensive care for 4, 5, 6 weeks. So an honest conversation in society about how we use data, the right checks and balances on using those data, and then the right combination of technology providers where people get together and stop sitting in your own silos and saying, I want as much of this pie as I can get together like we did in the pandemic, pull your resources and come up with really innovative solutions that combine great wearable technology with great software integrators, with artificial intelligence, decision support, and workflow change in hospitals. So there's a lot to change, I guess, but I think it's a potentially interesting future.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Ian. You mentioned so many important things there. The sick care, unfortunately, is the way it works. We go and fix when we are ill. But I've been following the great work that you've been doing. I mean, before I round up, let me actually congratulate you for that. You have a very big deal with NHS Wales, which I found, and you're doing things more proactively. And I think the conversation, we have a snippet of the conversation going towards the preventative and more the proactive healthcare. Of course, it's going to take time, but I think we getting all the pieces of the jigsaw together, the wearables, the right people, the data, and eventually we get there. But also, is a very complex piece. I mean, digital transformation is not just a one step thing that we do and is done. But yeah, very interesting. We could spend an hour on this question. Unfortunately, I'm going to round up. Ian, I appreciate
Yeah.
your input. It's been magnificent. Very, I mean, very insightful. But before I round up, I finish all my episodes with, it's not really a question as such, is 1 minute of fame. So over to you. You can talk about anything whatsoever that you like. I mean, a personal achievement, a career, a colleagues, Ascom, wearables, your fitness goals. You can talk about family. You can talk anything that you like. Ian, over to you, please.
I could talk about so many things. I think, if we're going to talk about some kind of achievement, I want to talk about what Ascom did in Wales, because for me, this was a fundamental shift in what we can achieve. And, NHS Wales approached a really complex project of trying to digitalize all of their critical care, every single adult critical care unit in one country on one system. And it's super ambitious. It's the most interesting, ambitious project I think I've ever seen with my own eyes, and certainly the most interesting and ambitious project I've ever worked on. The team in Wales, NWIS, or Digital Health Wales as they are now, and the Welsh Critical Care and Trauma Network, the doctors and nurses involved in this, is so ambitious and so driven. And we at Ascom approached it understanding that you needed a true partnership to make this happen. It's not a vendor, but it's not a vendor-buyer relationship. It's not a transaction. It's a partnership for a long period of time. And, I've worked with them now since 2018 when they started this tender process. And, we're going to be in at least 10 years of partnership. I'm so excited by it. The potential to impact the lives of patients and doctors and nurses in that critical care environment in Wales is huge. And I'm really, really looking forward to seeing the outcomes of what we achieve together there. So I think that's the most exciting thing I could talk about.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ian. What a way to finish. And I referenced that previously. And a magnificent achievement. Also, a concrete case study, a practical case study. And also, you're setting the bar in a way how a good collaboration would look like in the real world. So yeah, thank you so much, Ian, for your time today, your expertise, your insights, and everything that you brought to the interview.
It's a real pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, João.
Great. I'm going to round up now. I want to thank all the viewers for following us. Make sure you subscribe. And also, before I round up, acknowledge again the global partner Spirit Digital and Ascom. I'm going to put all the links in the body of the video. Check them out. Great work that they are doing, and get in touch with them. I'll also put Ian's details, LinkedIn, and his details, how you can get in touch. So I'll see you all next time. Bye for now.